battle raged at the end of the first tournament. The forces of Earthrealm were facing their greatest challenge. Mortal Kombat!
Shaolin Monks isn't just one of the greatest Mortal Kombat games of all time. In my opinion, it's straight up one of the best games to release during the mid-2000s, which for those that weren't around back then, it was basically the era of the PlayStation 2, Xbox and GameCube. This game is legendary in so many ways, saving the reputation of the notorious MK spin-offs, expanding the MK universe a little bit, and giving players a fresh new way to experience Mortal Kombat like they never have before. But it isn't just those things. It's the fact that this game is actually 2-player co-op all the way, where the game arguably becomes even better when you're playing it with a friend or a relative or whoever you're going to play your games with. Today's video breaks down this standout MK title, one of our favourite games of all time in fact, telling the story and giving you as much of a one-stop shop experience as possible. And stay tuned for the end because this game was also pretty iconic back in the day for its possibilities with Game Shark, taking the experience to a whole new, although rather ridiculous level. It's the real 2000s experience. So here's a brief history before we get stuck in. What actually is Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks? Well, according to research materials online, there were originally plans to make a Liu Kang-focused spin-off after Special Forces. At this time, we'd had Special Forces, we'd focused on Sub-Zero, this would have been Liu Kang. Unfortunately, Special Forces performed so terribly that this idea was pretty much thrown out. This is covered in various videos and websites, and I guess it makes sense. Special Forces did not match audience expectations, and even that game had its own troubled development that I've documented on this channel before. Years later, however, during the 3D era of Deadly Alliance and Deception, at the time, Armageddon wouldn't be out until a little while later, another spin-off was in development by Midway's LA team. The game was still being directed and overseen by the likes of Sean Himmerich and Ed Boon, so the MK team was still involved in production, but due to the actual fighting game portion of the team being busy with the main games, Shaolin Monks was simply handled by a separate part of the company. The game, in essence, is a 1 to 2 player, third-person adventure beat-em-up, but with a sophisticated focus on the fighting portion of the game. It really didn't play like a mindless button masher, right? The characters you played had combos with various pathing and different options for different sections of the game, and when you're playing it with a second player, the combos became even more ridiculous because of all of the built-in character synergy. Now, when it comes to story, basically Shaolin Monks follows the journey of Liu Kang and Kung Lao, who have to work together in a retelling of the Mortal Kombat 2 story. It isn't a one-to-one remake, there are differences between the original story and what you experience in Shaolin Monks, but it still manages to feel refreshing, and thanks to the cutscenes and the, I suppose, structure of the game, there is always the next section to unlock, which is a new way to play the game. I don't want to go over the story in detail because there is a chance that some of you, after watching this, might want to play it yourself, so I'll leave the actual plot for you to discover. But basically, after the events of the original Mortal Kombat, the Shaolin Monks must travel through Outworld to defeat various fighters and collect medallions. Each section of the game is a familiar environment inspired by the stages of previous games. This could be the monastery, the living forest, or the wastelands, for example. And when you reach the end of the area and defeat the boss, you'll be rewarded with a new movement ability, which will let you access a new area that you previously couldn't get to. It is a very simple structure, and one that you're no doubt very experienced with at this point, but it is structured well in this game, because no area lasts too long, there's healthy challenge to be had, and the new abilities you get are fairly self-explanatory, so going to a different world doesn't take a lot of effort. But this is where the game really shines though. That is the combat. I said earlier that this game just doesn't feel like a mindless button masher. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with a game that lets you do that anyway. I played a ton of games as a kid and had fun mashing away, right? But in Shaolin Monks, there is a lot that you can do. Characters have various attack buttons that either keep the opponent grounded, sometimes they'll launch them into the air, and if you do that, characters have their own air combat possibilities to keep things going. All of this is really important, because it isn't just basic attacks that a character has access to. Special moves are usually tied to a meter underneath your health bar, and the special moves are always returning attacks from older games. Liu Kang has his fireball, Kung Lao has his spin and his teleport. I mean, it's almost all there, basically, but these attacks can be powered up through a built-in progression system. Players collect experience throughout the game, and you can use that XP to level up various areas of your gameplay. And this is a super good addition because it gives you access to higher damaging attacks or combos, new moves entirely sometimes, or massively powered up versions of an existing move. In some cases, powered up attacks are almost vital to a playthrough because later in the game, base moves are kinda hard to win with unless you've bulked them up. And that's coming from experience, having recently completed a Shaolin Monks challenge run with Mustard. These things all work beautifully together to create an experience that is not only fun, but it still feels incredibly Mortal Kombat focused. And that leads me to the next thing to talk about, which is finishing moves. Finishing moves in Shaolin Monks are worked into the game in, I would say, a pretty masterful way. Standard finishers can be performed, and the characters you play have quite a few to choose from, but they mostly serve a purpose to either heal you when you need to get some extra health, or deal with an enemy that needs to be removed quickly. Maybe you're low on health and you want to take out a key target, right? That's what regular finishing moves are all about. However, throughout the game, you will learn a mortality, which exists to take out multiple targets at once. And after that, you find the brutality, which is a powered up state that has you be practically unstoppable for a short time. Now, all of these finishers, they require different levels of finisher gauge, which you build by simply dealing damage to enemies. There are more efficient ways to build this than others, and it's entirely character by character focused, but by hitting the opponent, you're always building up this major resource, which you can spend when you desperately need it. None of the finishers last too long, so you're not stuck looking at a screen for ages. Most of them look visually really creative, and some of them even inspired future fatalities we'd see later, like Kung Lao, for example. Now, finishing moves aren't the only things to be worked into the core gameplay. Many areas require a switch to be pulled, or something has to be smashed for you to continue, and that's where the game introduces the Test Your Might minigame. These work really well, and it's just a nice little extra thing in there to keep the classic MK experience alive. And there isn't too many of them either, so you don't exactly get bored of it. Now, to reiterate what I said, the combat may be third person, and it's definitely more of an adventure-focused kind of game, but it still feels incredibly like a Mortal Kombat game, and why I would love nothing more one day than to see this kind of game release again for a modern audience. I feel like there's just endless possibilities, and so many people would enjoy it. I'm not the only one that has that feeling either. A lot of people often say they want to see this kind of game come back. The boss fights are another section I want to talk about because, in my opinion, the team really nailed them. When you reach the end of an area, you fight the area boss, whether it's Reptile, Baraka, Goro, or others. Each boss has its own, shall we say, gimmick that retains the identity of the character, but it works in a gameplay sense to make it feel like more of a boss fight and less of a isolated 1v1 against a slightly powered up standard enemy, which it definitely could have been. For example, Reptile goes invisible, or he has phases where he goes to a set area and scatters force balls everywhere. Baraka actually has a Test Your Might portion built in because you have to conquer him in a sword fight. It's little details like this that make the fight more interesting, and I gotta say, it's one of the more memorable and creative aspects of the entire game for me. There are some hidden boss fights that I'm going to be talking about in a little bit, but ultimately, all of this comes to an end right in the final section where you have to complete a boss kumite on one life bar. You get a little bit of HP in between fights, but trust me, this is punishing on a first playthrough, and it's incredibly difficult. Most people that talk about this game now, and I've heard it time and time again, I've said it myself time and time again, that it's a great game, but oh my word, that final boss was nearly impossible when you've played it for the first time. It is crushingly brutal. So, I've spent this entire video talking about the Shaolin monks, right? Kung Lao and Liu Kang. But here's the wild bit. They aren't the only characters you can play as. And I'm not talking about the Versus mode, which has a few extra characters in there, characters you can unlock by playing the game and unlocking their secret tokens. I'm talking about the main story, and especially the co-op. Once you beat the game as either Kung Lao or Liu Kang, you actually unlock Scorpion or Sub-Zero to play through the entire game again. But they have their own attacks, their own combos, and even their own finishing moves. So this is where Shaolin Monks, for me, gets taken to an entirely different level. Because by adding these two characters, the gameplay possibilities drastically increase. The synergy of these characters together, or even on a solo playthrough, the new ways you can fight bosses or move around the game. It's one of those things that truly turns Shaolin Monks into something really special. Because the replayability of this kind of game historically comes from beating it with all the characters. They've got their own set of challenges you'll face because you have different moves, right? Or seeing how fast you can complete the game. Perhaps you want to try the hard mode after you've beat the regular one. I mean, hell, if you want to take things even further and try your hand at speedruns, the characters break the game in all sorts of wild ways. Whether it's Scorpion flying through the air with a menu trick, or Kung Lao straight up falling through the floor. I know that's more specific, but look, in 2023, the different characters still provide that variety of how a player can experience everything. And for me, that's fantastic. But as this is a Mortal Kombat game, it isn't without its secrets and hidden content. The first are the secret bosses, which I briefly touched on earlier. Ermac is my personal favourite, and his involves returning to the Wuxi Academy much later in the game when you've unlocked enough movement mechanics to reach it. You're presented with the classic warrior shrine, but with one statue seeming a bit out of place compared to the others. After investigating it a few times, it turns out this statue is Ermac, who now you have to fight. He uses telekinesis and turns the Johnny Cage statue to life, evening the odds for himself a little bit, and I like this fight a lot. The second, and I would say the hardest to find on a first playthrough, is Melina. You fight her in the Living Forest. Right near where you start this area, you can grab onto some vines that are pretty hard to spot, but they take you to a new section. And when you reach the end of this section, you fight Melina, and she's protected by 2 palace guards from Shang Tsung's palace. It's a tricky fight, but one that you can definitely deal with. The final secret boss fight near the end of the game is Kano, and you unlock his fight by repeatedly speaking to Kitana at the end of the game, who's currently a prisoner of Shao Kahn. This one lets you team up with Jax, and it also grants you some bonus health in the final battle. It isn't just secret bosses though. In the Living Forest, you actually find Smoke, and he gives you a few secret challenges to complete one by one, and he makes you go through various areas of the game by doing this. Now, if you complete these trials, you actually unlock the ability to play the original arcade version of Mortal Kombat 2. That sounds great, but sadly, I have a grudge against this one because growing up, Mustard and myself owned the EU PAL version of this game, which did not have Mortal Kombat 2 available. We searched every corner of this game as kids, and we just couldn't find it, only to realise many years later that EU PAL doesn't even bloody have it! The biggest secret of the entire game, however, is the hidden survival mode. This game actually has a survival component, with each stage increasing in difficulty. Some will involve multiple bosses, others are just huge hordes of enemies, and on hard mode it's a real challenge, but you'll never find it without a strategy guide. This was a magazine seller for sure. Now, to get access to this, you have to do the following in the Foundry, which is the final section of the game. First, collect the axe that you have to construct in the Foundry itself. Then, return to the cave entrance room you came from. Take an instant left into the lava room, jump in, then out. If the room isn't open for you, throw an enemy into it to break the wall. Then, it's all about breaking a series of barrels with your axe's heavy attack. The first barrel is near the ground level Test Your Might. The second is up the ramp to your right, where it is the barrel to your right. The third is the closest barrel to you on the left-hand side, next to where you go up the ramp. The barrel behind the crushers is next. After that, return to the right-hand room and destroy the second barrel, and the last barrel is to the left-hand side of the ramp. If you've done all this correctly, survival mode is right there. Now, there is no chance you'd find this without a strategy guide. And like I said, this kind of secret is what gaming magazines were all about as kids. Now, the story about it that I saw online is that it was officially called the Boss Rush mode, and it wasn't finished by the time the game had to be shipped, with plans to add more variety, more levels, and it would have been a simple selection in the main menu once you beat the game. So instead of putting something unfinished in the menu, they decided to sneak in this version as a massive secret, as finished as it could be. The final thing I want to do with this video is mention what Shaolin Monks players are doing with this game now, and even what people were doing many years ago, even when it had just released. Shaolin Monks has been put together in such a way that modifying the game to play as different characters works shockingly well, to the point where you can get through the entire game with unintended characters that just simply work, with their own special moves, their own inputs, and their own combos. I'm talking standard enemies that you fight, boss characters, stuff in between. Being able to modify Shaolin Monks now and play characters unintended and having it still work makes it feel like a totally new experience. And here's where it all came from. Anyone that played video games back in the 90s or the 2000s will be familiar with Game Shark, or in the UK, it was Action Replay. These games would be put into your console to essentially modify single-player games that you would experience on your own. This was before the days of the internet, so it's not like now where cheating can absolutely ruin the multiplayer experience or be used to abuse leaderboards. The cheat codes that you would put in back in the day, and that was the days where many codes were even available and built in, would simply let you experience your single-player game in a very different way that only affected you. This kind of thing would almost always come down to, I don't know, giving yourself all major items in Resident Evil, or giving yourself infinite lives in Castlevania. It was just a way to alter how you played the game, and like I said, it only affected the person doing it, and at the risk of corrupting a memory card or something. It was very common practice for people to have Action Replay or Game Shark, but it did come with its own risks that, as a stupid kid, I kinda just took. The interesting thing in the case of Shaolin Monks was that, although you could give yourself infinite health or infinite lives, no one ever did that. That stuff was boring. What was compatible, and I don't even know how it began, was being able to set your playable character to any character that existed in the game. It would essentially take whoever you picked in the main menu and tell the game that you're playing somebody else. This was where the variety of the Game Shark really started, and so many people back in the day did this to just give themselves a different single-player or co-op experience. The most direct to the original version way of playing this game is to pick one of the Versus Mode characters, because the Versus Mode characters have their own fatalities, they have their own ways of moving around, and they have complete movesets. The only time you will encounter what's basically a soft lock is when you enter the Mortality Room or the Brutality Room. If you have no way of going out of bounds, these characters cannot progress. However, you can use debug menus to transition from one room to the other if you want to simulate a complete campaign experience. Maybe you want to play a boss character. The boss characters can be a little bit temperamental, and it depends on the caliber of the boss. Sometimes it can really mess with the health bars and stuff like that. But I like going into certain rooms as Boss Ermac. I mean, he doesn't do a lot of damage, but being able to throw various enemies around is always a good laugh, and I'm still yet to get tired of it. Maybe you want to play as a palace guard, one of the basic NPCs. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but hey, there's an option for everybody. Nah, I kind of feel like playing Shao Kahn today. Let's see how that goes. Wait, no, I've changed my mind. I want to play Kintaro. I want to uppercut some things. Wait, no, sorry, I've changed my mind again. I just have a real urge to play that random tree from the Living Forest. I want to eat. Why can I do this? Why does it work? No, I just really feel like I want to use the green skull that you see flying around. It calls to me. I have no reason. You get the point. There are so many ways to play this game thanks to picking different characters that I'm surprised it doesn't even crash the game. A testament to how the game is built, I suppose. Nowadays, if people want to try out different characters, there is a famous ROM hack called SM Hook. Basically, it's Shaolin monks with a few extra options. Being able to access the debug menu, being able to change characters on the fly, there's a free camera mode, for example. It's wizardry, really. I have no idea how the modder Ermacher, who you may have heard from on this channel before, is able to do stuff like this. But go check him out, and if you want to try it yourself, I'm sure there's instructions for how to set it up. However, that is the story of Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, a game very close to my heart, a game I've played many hours of and will play many hours more. I appreciate you for stopping by and watching this video, and feel free to stick around for plenty more Mortal Kombat where that came from. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.